In the year 2150, Earth stood on the brink of extinction, the once vibrant blue planet now a battlefield scarred by relentless alien invasions. The Zarvans were ruthless invaders, a species of towering figures with metallic skin and piercing red eyes. Their ships darkened the sky, casting ominous shadows over cities that once buzzed with life. Commander Elena Torres stood in the command center of a hidden bunker beneath the ruins of what had once been New York City. The air was thick with tension and despair. The remnants of humanity clung to hope like a fragile thread. Elena looked at the faces around her, a motley crew of survivors. Each person carried the weight of loss etched into their features. They were scientists, engineers, soldiers, and civilians, united by a singular purpose to fight back against their oppressors. But the odds seemed insurmountable. The Zarvans outnumbered them 1,000 to 1, and their technology was far more advanced than anything humanity had developed. As Elena paced the room, she could feel the gravity of their situation pressing down on her shoulders. She had lost friends, family, and the hope of a normal life. She had joined the resistance not just for revenge, but for a future she could no longer envision in her mind. Each plan she concocted felt futile against the might of the alien force outside. Suddenly, the screen flickered to life, displaying a series of encrypted messages intercepted from the Zarvan command. The words appeared scrambled, but the frequency seemed oddly familiar. Elena leaned closer, her heart racing. As she began to decipher the code in her mind, it dawned on her that this message could be a weakness, a flaw in their defenses that she could exploit. The room fell silent as she relayed her findings to the team. The air crackled with a renewed sense of purpose. The plan was risky, but it offered a glimmer of hope. Elena proposed a daring infiltration into a nearby Zarvan outpost, where they believed the source of the transmissions was located. Her voice trembled with anticipation as she outlined the mission. Each member of the team would have a critical role to play. The atmosphere shifted from despair to determination as they rallied behind their leader. One by one, they volunteered for the mission, their faces alight with a fierce resolve. Even those who had once doubted the resistance now stood tall, ready to fight. They were not just a ragtag group of survivors. They were humanity's last stand, and with every heartbeat, they felt the weight of their ancestors pushing them forward. As they gathered supplies and weaponry, Elena took a moment to reflect on their journey. This mission would take them into the heart of darkness, where the Zarvans ruled, and where many had fallen before them. Yet she could feel an electric charge in the air, an energy that stirred something deep within her, a sense of purpose she had thought lost forever. Night fell as they set out, moving through the shattered streets of the city. The remnants of a world that had once thrived now lay in ruins, yet even in the darkness, there was beauty. Flickering lights of hope ignited in the hearts of those who still believed. As they navigated the treacherous terrain, the weight of what they were fighting for fueled their determination. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to reclaim their legacy, to prove that humanity could not be extinguished. Elena led the way, her heart racing with a mix of fear and exhilaration. As they approached the Zarvan outpost, the night air was thick with tension and anticipation. They moved silently, shadows blending into the darkness, their breaths barely audible as they prepared to confront the enemy. And in that moment, they became more than survivors. They became a force of resistance, ready to reclaim their home. As the team approached the towering structure of the Zarvan outpost, the air buzzed with anticipation. The metallic walls loomed overhead, reflecting the dim light from the scattered stars. A palpable sense of dread filled the air, yet it was overshadowed by an invigorating rush of adrenaline. Elena led the way, her heart pounding as they moved into position behind a pile of rubble that served as temporary cover. They had spent days planning this infiltration, mapping out the layout of the outpost and the routines of the alien guards. But now, as they faced the reality of their mission, doubt flickered in Elena's mind. She could feel the weight of her team's hopes resting on her shoulders. She turned to her comrades, each one armed with a weapon and a fierce determination, their faces illuminated by the glow of the distant security lights. "Remember our objective," Elena whispered, her voice steady but urgent. "We're here to gather intelligence and sabotage their communications. We need to disrupt their control over the sector if we have any chance of turning the tide." Nods of agreement met her words as they readied themselves, a mix of soldiers and civilians, all united by a shared desire for freedom. They were each driven by personal stakes that fueled their resolve. One soldier had lost his family in a raid, another had seen their hometown reduced to ashes by the Zarvans. Each story added another layer of purpose to their mission. With a deep breath, Elena signaled for them to move. They dashed from cover to cover, using the shadows as their allies. Their movements were calculated, each step bringing them closer to the outpost's entrance. A pair of guards patrolled nearby, their conversation a low growl in an alien tongue that sent shivers down Elena's spine. She motioned for her team to stop and listen. As the guards turned away, Elena seized the opportunity, signaling her team to advance. They slipped through a narrow entrance, hidden by debris, entering the outpost's dimly lit interior. The air was thick with the scent of machinery and something else metallic and cold. They were now in the belly of the beast. Once inside, they took a moment to regroup, scanning the vast space, filled with advanced technology, blinking lights, and alien consoles. It was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. They moved cautiously through the labyrinth of machinery, staying low and out of sight as they approached a central command room, filled with screens displaying various locations across the sector. Elena's heart raced as they gathered intel. The screens showed troop movements, communication lines, and supply routes. This information was gold. If they could relay it back to the Resistance, they might stand a chance against the Zarvans. She quickly began to jot down notes on her wrist device, while her team kept watch. But the tension was palpable as every passing second felt like an eternity. Suddenly, an alarm blared, piercing through the silence. The lights shifted to a red hue and chaos erupted. Elena's stomach dropped. The guards had noticed their intrusion. They had to act fast. She barked orders, her voice cutting through the panic. "We need to secure the data and get out now." With adrenaline coursing through their veins, they raced to download the crucial information, but the systems were locked. Elena's fingers flew over the console, desperate to bypass the security protocols. Her mind raced as she remembered the tactics she had studied in the Resistance. "Cover me," she shouted as her team positioned themselves at the door, weapons raised, ready to fight off any incoming guards. With a final burst of concentration, Elena hacked into the system, bypassing the security just as the door burst open, and the first wave of Zarvan guards stormed in. Her heart pounded as she completed the download. The data secured at the last possible moment, she grabbed her device and shouted, "Let's go." The team sprinted toward the exit, a cacophony of alien roars echoing behind them. Adrenaline surged through their bodies as they dashed through the outpost, the world outside calling them back to safety. And as they crossed the threshold into the night, the weight of their mission pressed down on them. But so did the exhilaration of defiance. They had struck a blow against the invaders, and they would fight on as long as they had breath left in their lungs. Bursting from the outpost into the cool night air, Elena and her team sprinted into the shadows of the nearby ruins. Their hearts raced as they navigated the debris-strewn streets. The blaring alarms and the shouts of the Zarvan guards faded behind them, but the urgency of their escape pushed them forward, every sound amplified in the silence of the night. Elena glanced at her wrist device. The data download was complete. A wave of relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. They needed to get back to the bunker and relay the information to the Resistance. Their survival depended on it. As they raced through the remnants of the city, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted. "We need to split up," she said breathlessly as they reached a fork in the path. "It'll confuse them and increase our chances of making it back." The team nodded, exchanging determined glances. They had come too far to falter now. With a shared sense of purpose, they quickly divided into smaller groups, each taking a different route. To minimize their exposure, Elena motioned for her group to follow her as they ducked into a narrow alley, lined with crumbling walls and flickering lights. The tension was palpable as they moved quietly, scanning the shadows for any signs of the Zarvans. Every footfall echoed ominously against the silence. Their instincts, honed from months of survival, kept them alert and focused. Yet as they reached a more open area, Elena felt an unsettling sensation creeping up her spine. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind them, the unmistakable sound of heavy footfalls approaching. Their hearts raced as they hurried through the alley, their breaths quickening in fear They rounded a corner and spotted a group of Zarvan soldiers patrolling ahead, their figures silhouetted against the flickering lights. Down, Elena whispered urgently, signaling for her team to crouch behind a stack of debris. As the guards drew closer, the tension in the air was suffocating. Every muscle in her body screamed to flee, but they had to remain hidden. They held their breath as the soldiers passed mere feet away, their voices low and guttural, sending chills down Elena's spine. Once the guards were out of sight, they slipped back into the shadows, moving as quickly as possible through the maze of rubble. Elena's mind raced. She mentally retraced their route back to the bunker, recalling every turn they had taken. Suddenly, they came to a stop as they reached a barricade blocking their way. "This wasn't here before," one of her team members said incredulously, peering over the debris. Elena's heart sank. They had anticipated obstacles, but not this. She scanned the area for an alternative route when she noticed a narrow opening in the barricade. "We can fit through there," she pointed out. They squeezed through the gap, emerging on the other side into a deserted street, illuminated by a faint glow from the distant fires that still burned in the ruins. But relief was fleeting as they heard the unmistakable sound of a Zarvan ship overhead. "Move," Elena urged her team as they darted into the cover of a collapsed building, their bodies pressed against the cold concrete. As they waited for the ship to pass, the vibrations rattled the ground beneath them, and the sound of the engines was deafening. But they had no choice but to remain still and silent. Once the ship flew past, the tension began to ease, but they knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. Elena glanced at her device, confirming their position. They were close to the bunker, but they still had to navigate through enemy territory. "Let's keep moving," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. They began to move again, making their way toward the bunker, each step filled with purpose as the weight of their mission pressed heavily on their shoulders. Finally, they reached the familiar entrance of the bunker. The heavy metal door stood as a symbol of safety and hope, but they couldn't let their guard down yet. Elena pressed her hand to the biometric scanner, her heart racing as they waited for the door to respond. With a hiss, the door slid open, and they rushed inside, the familiar darkness enveloping them. As they entered the command center, the atmosphere was charged with urgency. Their comrades looked up, startled and hopeful as they arrived. "We did it," Elena announced breathlessly, holding up her wrist device. "We got the intel." A cheer erupted around her, but she quickly quieted them. "We need to analyze the data and prepare for our next move. The fight is far from over." As they gathered around the central console, the weight of their discovery hung heavy in the air. They had struck a blow against the Zarvans, but now they had to figure out how to turn that victory into a strategic advantage. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders, and they were ready to rise to the challenge. The command center buzzed with energy as Elena and her team gathered around the central console, the room filled with the flickering glow of monitors displaying the data they had retrieved from the Zarvan outpost. Elena's heart raced as she scrolled through the files. The information was a treasure trove of details about enemy troop movements, supply lines, and vulnerabilities that could be exploited. "Look at this," one of her team members pointed to a map of the sector illuminated on the screen. "These supply routes are all interconnected. If we can intercept them, we could disrupt their operations for weeks." Elena nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. "We need to plan a series of coordinated strikes, targeting these key points. It will confuse them and weaken their hold on the area." The room erupted with discussion as everyone contributed ideas and strategies, each voice adding to the cacophony of hope and determination. For the first time in a long while, they were not just reacting to the Zarvan threat, they were strategizing, actively fighting back. As the plan solidified, Elena felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The stakes were higher than ever. They were planning a series of raids on the enemy's supply routes, but the risks were monumental and failure could cost them dearly. "All right, team," she called out, cutting through the chatter. "We need to divide into groups to cover more ground. We can hit 2 supply lines simultaneously, but we must coordinate our efforts flawlessly." The team members quickly organized themselves, each taking on specific roles. One group would focus on a supply depot located on the outskirts of the city, while another would target an enemy convoy transporting vital resources. As they prepared to set out, Elena couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that gnawed at her. She had always been a leader, but this felt different. The weight of responsibility felt heavier, knowing that lives depended on their success. Commander, one of her closest friends, Ava, approached her, concern etched on her face. What if we encounter more Zarvans than we anticipate? We're already stretched thin. Elena met her gaze, steeling herself. We adapt. We have to trust our training and each other. If we stick to the plan, we can do this. With a final nod of determination, the team set out into the night. The atmosphere outside was thick with tension. The city lay in eerie silence, save for the distant sounds of Zarvan patrols. They'd moved quickly and quietly, their hearts pounding in sync with their footsteps. Elena led her group toward the supply depot, adrenaline coursing through her veins. As they navigated the narrow alleyways, avoiding the main streets that would surely be crawling with enemies, they approached the target, their breaths shallow as they surveyed the area. The depot was a sprawling complex, heavily guarded with Zarvan soldiers patrolling the perimeter and surveillance drones hovering above the entrance. Elena's mind raced. She needed a way to create a diversion, to draw the guards away from the entrance. All right, here's the plan, she whispered to her team. We'll set off a series of small explosives at the far side of the compound. It will create chaos and give us the window we need to slip inside. The team nodded in agreement as they positioned themselves strategically, each member taking their place, while Elena counted down, her heart pounding in her chest. With a swift motion, she signaled the explosives, detonating with a series of loud booms that echoed through the night. The guards immediately turned their attention to the explosions. Chaos erupted as they scrambled to assess the situation. Now, Elena shouted as they dashed toward the entrance, taking advantage of the distraction. They slipped inside the compound, moving stealthily through the shadows. The smell of metal and oil filled the air as they navigated the maze of crates and equipment. Every second felt like an eternity as they raced toward the main storage area, their objective within reach. But the tension was palpable. They could be discovered at any moment. Finally, they reached the heart of the depot, a massive storage room filled with supplies, weapons, and resources. The sight sent a surge of exhilaration through Elena's veins. They had to destroy it. Plant the charges, she ordered as her team sprang into action, quickly setting explosives around the room. They worked in silence, urgency driving their movements. As they finished the last charge, Elena glanced at the timer on her device. They had mere moments before the guards would return. Let's move, she commanded, and they sprinted back toward the exit, the alarm blaring in the distance as they made their escape. The charges detonated behind them, a deafening roar echoing through the night. As they dashed away, the fire illuminating the sky, marking their victory in this small yet significant battle against the Zarvan forces. Elena and her team raced through the chaotic streets of the city, the sound of the explosion still ringing in their ears. Adrenaline surged as they maneuvered through the shadows. The flames from the supply depot flickered behind them, casting an eerie glow on their faces. The exhilaration of their successful strike mingled with the weight of the knowledge that the Zarvans would soon be hunting them. We did it, one of her teammates breathed, panting heavily as they reached a narrow alleyway to regroup. We actually did it. Elena nodded, a smile breaking through the tension, but her heart still raced. They had only just begun to strike back, and the real test lay ahead. They needed to regroup and plan their next move while avoiding any enemy patrols. Let's get back to the bunker, she said, her voice steady. We need to analyze the intel from the supply depot and prepare for whatever comes next. As they made their way back, the streets felt different. The thrill of victory slowly faded, giving way to the harsh reality of their situation. They were still outnumbered and outgunned. The Zarvans would not take their defeat lightly. Upon returning to the bunker, the atmosphere shifted once again. The initial cheers and celebration turned into focused determination as the team gathered around the central console, the glow of the monitors illuminating their determined faces. Elena quickly called for silence. We need to assess the impact of our strike and prepare for potential retaliation, she said, her tone serious. The joy of their victory was quickly replaced by the gravity of their situation. The team began to analyze the data collected during their raid. The images and information displayed on the screens painted a clearer picture of the Zarvans' operations. The supply routes they had targeted were essential to the alien forces, The loss would hinder their ability to maintain control in the sector. "Look at this," Ava pointed at a screen displaying the supply lines. "They're already starting to redirect resources to compensate for the losses we inflicted. We have to hit them again before they stabilize." Elena felt a surge of urgency. "We need to act fast. We can't give them a chance to regroup. If we can disrupt their operations further, we might create enough chaos to give us a fighting chance." The room buzzed with energy as they brainstormed their next move ideas. Flowing like wildfire, everyone was eager to contribute. They had tasted success, and it fueled their resolve. "Let's hit another supply route," one of the engineers suggested. "The one near the old industrial district. It's poorly guarded since it's not a primary supply line, but it could still make a significant impact." Elena nodded, considering the plan. "That's a good target, but we need to keep it low profile. If we can use stealth and precision, we might avoid drawing too much attention." As they planned their strategy, Elena felt the weight of responsibility bearing down on her once more. She was leading them into danger, but the fire of hope burned brightly within her. She couldn't allow fear to dictate their actions. With a plan set in motion, the team divided into smaller groups, each assigned specific tasks. They had to ensure everything was meticulously coordinated, from securing equipment to mapping out escape routes. As the sun began to rise, the sky transformed into hues of orange and purple, illuminating the remnants of the city, a stark contrast to the darkness that had enveloped them for so long. It was a reminder of what they were fighting for. "All right, everyone," Elena called out, gathering everyone's attention. "We move in 10 minutes. Stay sharp and keep your communication devices on." With a final nod of determination, they set out into the dawn, their hearts pounding with anticipation. As they made their way toward the industrial district, the atmosphere was charged with both fear and excitement. As they approached their target, the sounds of machinery and distant voices filled the air. They moved stealthily through the shadows, keeping low and avoiding the main pathways. Elena's instincts kicked in as they neared the supply route. Her heart raced with the thrill of impending action. She motioned for her team to stop as they observed a group of Zarvan guards stationed at the entrance to the supply area. "Remember our plan," she whispered as they prepared to execute their strike. With a mix of fear and determination, they took a deep breath, ready to engage in their next battle. This time, they would fight not just for survival, but for the hope of reclaiming their home and securing a future for humanity. As they crept closer to the supply route, Elena could feel the tension crackling in the air. Every instinct urged her to act quickly yet methodically. The team positioned themselves behind a stack of rusted containers, their breaths shallow as they observed the Zarvan guards stationed at the entrance, their imposing figures silhouetted against the industrial landscape. Elena signaled for silence, her heart racing with the knowledge that failure was not an option. The plan they had devised relied heavily on stealth and precision. If they were discovered now, it could mean disaster. "On my mark," she whispered, her voice steady despite the urgency of the moment. "We create a distraction on the left flank and move in from the right. We need to split their attention." Her team nodded, their expressions resolute. As they prepared to execute their roles, one member quietly set a small explosive charge on the far side of the compound, while the others readied themselves for the incursion. 3, 2, 1, go, Elena commanded as the explosive detonated with a loud bang. The noise reverberated through the air, and the guards turned toward the source of the sound, their eyes wide with alarm. "Now," she shouted, as they surged forward, darting toward the entrance. The element of surprise was theirs for the taking. They stormed into the supply area, the clang of metal on metal echoing as they engaged the guards who were still trying to comprehend what was happening. Elena moved with purpose, her instincts guiding her as she navigated the chaos. With every move, she felt the weight of her team's trust propelling her forward. She fought alongside her comrades, each one holding their own against the Zarvan soldiers, their training and desperation driving them to new heights. Elena's heart raced as she faced a guard charging at her, his metallic skin glinting in the light. She sidestepped just in time, grabbing a discarded weapon from the ground and swinging it toward him. The impact reverberated through her arms as he staggered back. "Keep pushing forward," she shouted to her team, her voice rising above the din of battle. They were making headway, but they needed to secure the supplies before the reinforcements arrived. They reached the main storage area, a vast space, filled with crates and equipment. The sheer volume of resources left unguarded filled Elena with a mix of excitement and urgency. "Plant the charges here," she instructed her team as they quickly moved to secure the explosives. The room was sprawling and filled with various weapons and supplies. The implications of destroying the stockpile could shift the balance of power in their favor. As her team worked to set the charges, Elena kept watch. Her senses heightened. Every sound seemed amplified. The distant thud of approaching footsteps sent a jolt of fear through her, but they had to stay focused. "Almost done," one of her teammates called out, their voices tense but resolute. Just as the last charge was planted, the alarms blared once more, a deafening siren that pierced through the chaos. The Zarvans were regrouping. "Move, move, move," Elena shouted, her heart pounding as she led the way back toward the exit. They had to make it out before the reinforcements arrived. As they raced through the supply area, the walls echoed with the sound of their footsteps, the weight of the explosives on their minds. Each step closer to freedom was fraught with danger. They emerged from the storage area into the main compound, but the sight before them made Elena's stomach drop. A group of Zarvan reinforcements had arrived, their silhouettes towering and menacing against the backdrop of the early morning light. "Fall back," she ordered instinctively as they turned to run, but the path they had taken was now blocked by the oncoming enemy soldiers. "Over there," Ava shouted, pointing to a side exit they hadn't noticed before. "Go," Elena urged as they sprinted toward the opening, their hearts racing in sync with their steps. They dove through the exit just as a barrage of energy blasts erupted behind them. They stumbled into a narrow alleyway, gasping for breath, the adrenaline coursing through their veins. "Did we get the charges set?" one of the team members asked breathlessly. "Yes, but we have to keep moving," Elena replied, glancing back toward the exit as they heard the Zarvans shouting in the distance, their voices echoing in the chaos. The weight of their mission pressed heavily on her shoulders, but as they caught their breath, Elena felt a flicker of hope. They had struck another blow against the invaders, and with every step they took, they were one step closer to reclaiming their world. "Let's regroup at the safe house," she said, finally breaking the tension in the air. "We need to debrief and prepare for whatever comes next." As they sprinted through the winding streets of the city, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that their actions had sparked something greater, a fire of resistance that would spread beyond their immediate struggles. It was a fight for humanity's legacy, and they were ready to rise to the challenge. The streets of the city were alive with the sounds of their escape as Elena and her team sprinted toward the safe house, each footfall echoing the urgency of their situation. The adrenaline that had fueled them began to wane, but the knowledge of their recent success kept them moving. As they rounded a corner, a familiar building came into view, its crumbling facade barely hiding the makeshift haven within. The safe house had become a sanctuary for their group, a place where plans were made and hope was nurtured. Once inside, they quickly secured the door behind them, breathing heavily as they leaned against the cool concrete walls. The tension of the previous encounter still coursed through their veins. "Did we lose anyone?" Elena asked, scanning the faces of her teammates. "Everyone's accounted for," Ava replied, her eyes wide with relief. "But we have to act quickly. They'll be looking for us." Elena nodded and moved toward the central table, where maps and plans were spread out like a battlefield. Their recent raids had left the Zarvans reeling, but she knew retaliation was inevitable. They needed to prepare for it. "Let's debrief," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos outside. "We need to analyze what we learned from the supply depot and plan our next moves." As they gathered around the table, Elena felt a sense of unity among her team. Their shared experiences forged bonds that went deeper than mere survival. They were fighting for a cause greater than themselves. "Here's what we know," she began, pointing to a map displaying the disrupted supply lines. "The explosions we set off will have a cascading effect on their operations, but we need to take advantage of the chaos before they can regroup." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group as they discussed their options, the atmosphere charged with determination, each member contributing ideas and strategies. "What about targeting their communications network?" one of the engineers suggested. "If we can take that out, it will further isolate their units and prevent them from coordinating an effective response." Elena considered the idea, nodding in agreement. That's a strong plan, but we'll need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more likely they are to tighten their defenses. Then we should split into two groups again. Ava proposed. One can focus on the communications array, while the other monitors troop movements in case they try to flank us. Exactly, Elena affirmed, feeling a surge of pride in her team's quick thinking. We'll need to remain coordinated and communicate effectively if we're going to pull this off. As they finalized their plan, the atmosphere shifted once more. A collective resolve settled in the room. They had become warriors in their own right, fighting not just for survival but for a future. With their mission set, the team began to gather supplies and weapons, preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. Elena took a moment to step outside the safe house, her heart heavy with the weight of their struggle. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the remnants of the city, a reminder of all that had been lost, but also a symbol of resilience. The spirit of humanity refused to be extinguished. As she stood there breathing in the cool air, Elena felt a sense of purpose wash over her. They were not just fighting against the Zarvans, they were fighting for the very essence of what it meant to be human, for the chance to rebuild and reclaim their home. Returning to the safe house, she rallied her team. We move out in 10 minutes. Everyone knows their roles. Let's show them what we're made of. With it, they set out once again into the depths of the city, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them, their hearts united by a shared resolve. As they approached the communications network, the streets felt different, the air thick with anticipation, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. Elena led her team through narrow alleys, their movements stealthy and calculated. They reached the target area, a fortified building that loomed over them. The guards were heavily armed and alert, their presence a stark reminder of the dangers they faced. Stick to the plan, Elena whispered as they crouched behind a nearby wall. We create a diversion and move in. With a nod from her team, they prepared to execute their strategy, their hearts racing in sync with the determination that pulsed through the air. This was their moment to strike again, and they were ready to seize it with both hands. As they crouched behind the wall, Elena could see the guards milling about their post. The communications network building stood ominously before them, fortified and bristling with defense systems. They needed to create a diversion that would allow them to slip inside unnoticed. Ready, she whispered, her team nodding in silent affirmation, each member aware of their role in the unfolding plan. With a quick gesture, Elena signaled for one of her teammates to throw a small device. She had modified it, emitted a series of loud beeps and flashes designed to draw attention away from their actual target. The moment the device landed and began its cacophony of noise, the guards reacted instantly, their attention drawn to the sound. As they moved away from the entrance, Elena seized the opportunity. Now, she commanded as they darted forward, slipping through the door just before it closed behind them. The heavy metal thud of the door echoed in the small space. Inside the building was a maze of corridors and rooms filled with blinking lights and buzzing machines. The air hummed with energy, the sight of it both awe-inspiring and intimidating. Stick together, Elena urged as they navigated the tight hallways, the sound of their footsteps muffled against the metallic floors. They reached a large room filled with screens displaying various data feeds and communications traffic. The sight of it sent a thrill of urgency through her veins. This was the nerve center of the Zarvan operations. If they could disrupt this, it would cripple their ability to coordinate effectively. Set the charges around the main console, she instructed her team as they moved swiftly to secure the explosives they had prepared. The countdown began as they worked. Elena kept a watchful eye on the door. Every second felt like an eternity. She could sense the tension mounting, knowing that they were operating on borrowed time. Planting charges in 3, 2, 1. She called out just as a loud crash echoed from the entrance of the room. Zarvans are here, Ava shouted, her eyes wide with fear and urgency. Finish up and prepare to fall back, Elena ordered, her heart racing. As she kept her gaze trained on the doorway, the sound of footsteps grew louder. Just as they finished securing the last charge, the door burst open, and a group of Zarvan soldiers stormed in, their eyes filled with fury. Get down, Elena shouted as they dove for cover. The room erupted into chaos. Energy blasts flew through the air, striking the walls and furniture around them. Return fire, she yelled as her team scrambled to their feet, weapons raised. They exchanged fire with the incoming guards, but the numbers were against them. "Charges are set," one of her teammates called out amid the chaos. "Let's go," Elena commanded as they fell back toward the exit. The explosions were set to detonate any moment. As they raced out of the building, Elena felt a rush of adrenaline. The thrill of combat surged through her. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving. They burst through the doors, just as the first explosions rocked the building behind them. The shockwave propelled them forward as they stumbled into the open air, debris flying in all directions. "Keep running," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the sound of destruction behind them. They dashed down the street, their hearts pounding as the building crumbled behind them, flames licking at the sky, illuminating the night with an eerie glow. Helena glanced back at the chaos they had caused. A sense of triumph surged within her. They had struck a significant blow against the Zarvans, and they were getting away. But they weren't out of danger yet. As they continued to run, she spotted a group of Zarvan soldiers regrouping further down the street, their weapons ready and aimed at her team. "Split up," she yelled urgently. "We'll confuse them." Without hesitation, they broke apart, moving in different directions, weaving through the rubble and shadows. Elena's heart raced as she ducked into an alley, her mind focused on finding safety. The sounds of chaos faded into the distance, but she knew they couldn't rest yet. Finally, she spotted a familiar structure in the distance. The safe house was within reach, and a surge of relief washed over her. They were still alive and had successfully completed their mission. As she approached the entrance, she could see Ava and a few others already inside, their faces filled with a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. "We did it," Elena breathed as they collapsed into the safe house, the weight of their struggle beginning to lift. In that moment, she realized they were not just surviving, they were reclaiming their future. Each strike against the Zarvans brought them closer to freedom. As they regrouped, Elena felt a sense of unity among her team. They had forged bonds through battle and sacrifice, and they were ready to continue the fight. "Let's prepare for the next step," she said, her voice steady, filled with determination. "This is just the beginning. We will take back our home." And as the flames of the past flickered behind them, they faced forward, ready to forge a new path in the fight for humanity's survival.